In the heart of the Texas prison system, one man defied every expectation, turning the institution's strictest rules into mere obstacles in his path. His story is nothing short of extraordinary. A mastermind who orchestrated not one, not two, but 4 audacious prison escapes in less than 5 years. Each attempt was more intricate and daring than the last, culminating in a final escape so ingenious it felt ripped from the pages of a Hollywood screenplay. Today we dive into a tale of brilliance, cunning, and high-stakes drama, starting in the early 1990s with a man named Stephen J. Russell. Stephen's life began unremarkably. In those days, he had no criminal record, working diligently as an accountant. His peaceful existence seemed destined to continue until a fateful day when his manager unjustly fired him. The dismissal shattered his trust in the system, leaving him with a deep sense of betrayal and disillusionment. Stephen had dedicated himself fully to his work, and the unfairness of the situation lit a spark of resentment that would transform his life forever. The fallout from losing his job marked a turning point. Stephen, once a model citizen, began to see the world through a lens of frustration and anger. Determined to take control of his destiny, he chose a dark path: fraud. Leveraging his natural intelligence and charisma, Stephen ventured into small-scale insurance scams. He staged accidents, sometimes risky ones, to claim insurance payouts. But in 1992, his schemes unraveled when authorities uncovered one of his cons, leading to his arrest and a 6-month prison sentence. Stephen had no intention of serving out his full sentence. From the moment he entered prison, he began observing the routines of guards and workers. Within weeks, he discovered a vulnerability in the system. Temporary workers often entered and exited the facility with minimal scrutiny. These individuals wore civilian clothes, carried radios, and were simply let out by guards after completing their tasks. Stephen saw an opportunity. Using his charm, Stephen arranged for someone on the outside to smuggle civilian clothes and a handheld radio into the prison. Disguised as one of these temporary workers, he mimicked their behavior, walking confidently through the facility as though inspecting equipment. When he reached the guard's station, he calmly knocked on the glass, signaling to be let out. Without question, the guards opened the door, and Stephen walked away from prison a free man. I hope you're enjoying the story so far. If you are, please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and click the bell icon to get notifications for more videos like this. Now, let's continue with the video. After his escape, Stephen disappeared into a new life, adopting a fresh identity and relocating to Florida. For 2 years, from 1992 to 1994, he remained under the radar. However, during a bold attempt to forge insurance checks, his luck ran out. Authorities caught up with him, discovering his true identity as an escaped convict. Once again, Stephen found himself behind bars, this time in Houston, Texas. Rather than planning another immediate escape, Stephen made a surprising decision. With less than a year remaining on his sentence, he resolved to serve his time and leave prison on legitimate terms. Upon his release, he tried to rebuild his life, working at a grocery store, but the mundane nature of the job couldn't satisfy his ambitions. Stephen craved excitement and wealth, setting his sights on a grander scheme that would secure him a life of luxury. One day, an advertisement in the newspaper caught Stephen's eye. It was a job listing for a financial manager position at a prestigious health insurance company. The opportunity seemed perfect, except for one glaring issue. Stephen had no qualifications or experience in the field. Undeterred, he devised a plan to create a new professional identity from scratch. Stephen forged an impressive resume, complete with fabricated degrees, certifications, and a history of working at top insurance firms. He didn't stop there. He immersed himself in financial literature, devouring books and newspapers like the Wall Street Journal, to familiarize himself with the industry's terminology. His quick wit and sharp mind allowed him to master the language of finance in no time. Armed with his new knowledge, Stephen aced the interview. His fabricated credentials and confident demeanor left no room for doubt. He was exactly what the company was looking for. However, there was one final hurdle: references. The company requested contact details for his previous employers to verify his experience. Stephen, always one step ahead, provided 3 phone numbers linked to a call forwarding service. When the company called, the lines redirected to Stephen himself. He answered each call, adopting different personas to match the fabricated identities of his references. With impeccable acting skills, he adjusted his tone, accent, and personality for each conversation. Stephen didn't just lie, he performed, delivering glowing reviews of his own work and further solidifying his credibility. By the time the calls ended, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that Stephen J. Russell was the ideal candidate. For the people contacting Stephen's references, there was no reason to suspect anything was amiss. The convincing voices and glowing endorsements seemed entirely authentic. Unbeknownst to them, they were unwitting participants in a carefully constructed web of deception. Stephen had skillfully maneuvered himself into a position of power within the company, setting the stage for his most ambitious con yet. But his success would soon unravel due to a critical mistake. Stephen's downfall began with a simple financial move, refinancing his home to secure a lower interest rate. A sharp-eyed bank employee noticed unusually large sums of money moving through his account and flagged it for investigation. The trail led directly back to the health insurance company where Stephen worked, triggering alarm bells at the highest levels of the organization. The company's CEO and senior executives launched a thorough internal review, uncovering Stephen's elaborate embezzlement scheme. As the investigation closed in, Stephen sensed the walls closing around him. Acting quickly, he withdrew $40,000 from various ATMs before his accounts were frozen. But desperation drove him to make a fateful error. He attempted to return to his home to collect personal items. The police, anticipating his move, had staked out the property and were waiting for him. Stephen walked straight into their trap and was arrested once again. This time, his parole bail was set at an astronomical $950,000, an amount impossible for him to gather with his assets frozen. Yet Stephen was not one to accept defeat. Within 2 months of his imprisonment, he crafted an audacious escape plan that relied on his charm and unparalleled ability to manipulate. From within his cell, Stephen managed to contact the Harris County Records Office, posing as Judge Charles Ham, the same judge who had presided over his case. Speaking with the confidence and authority of a seasoned legal professional, he spun a convincing story. He claimed to have held a secret appellate hearing that resulted in the reduction of Stephen Russell's parole bail from $950,000 to $45,000. His intricate knowledge of court procedures and case details convinced the office employee to make the change without hesitation. With his bail dramatically reduced, Stephen had to act quickly to secure the $45,000 without drawing undue attention. He contacted a prisoner financing company, convincing them to cover the reduced amount despite their typically strict policies. Once again, Stephen's charisma bent the rules to his favor. However, his actions had not gone unnoticed. Authorities in Harris County soon caught on to his deception. 5 days after his release, Stephen's location was compromised. Investigators monitoring his communications traced him to West Palm Beach, Florida, where he had checked into a beachfront hotel. Police descended on the location, catching him off guard. Once again, Stephen was taken into custody, this time facing harsher consequences for his repeated escapes and financial crimes. In court, Stephen surprised everyone by immediately pleading guilty, declining to appeal his conviction. This decision led to an exceptionally harsh sentence, 40 years in prison for embezzlement and escape. Even the prosecutor was stunned by his quick admission, given the severity of the punishment. Despite this, Stephen's acceptance was a calculated move. Deep down, he had no intention of serving his full sentence. Rather than returning him to Harris County Jail, officials transferred Stephen to a maximum security prison in Texas. Wary of his cunning, prison authorities implemented strict measures to monitor his activities. Confident in their heightened security, they believed Stephen's days of escape were over, but they underestimated his ingenuity. Stephen's mind was always in motion, and soon he devised another escape plan. This time, his attention turned to the prison's medical wing, where doctors and nurses wore green and blue scrubs distinct from the uniforms of guards. Observing the system, Stephen hatched a bold idea. He would transform his prison-issued clothing to mimic the scrubs worn by medical staff. After painstakingly dyeing his clothes the appropriate shade of green, Stephen waited for the perfect moment. On the morning of Friday, December 13th, 1996, he executed his plan. He donned the green clothes under his standard prison attire and headed to breakfast at 4 a.m. Afterward, he found a secluded spot, removed his outer layer, and emerged looking like a member of the medical team. With unwavering confidence, he walked toward the guards area. Stephen had studied the guards' routines extensively. One female guard, he observed, spent her mornings engrossed in phone calls, paying little attention to her surroundings. Seizing the opportunity, he approached her station, greeted her casually, and signaled her to open the door. Without suspicion, she complied, and Stephen stepped out of the prison, a free man once again. Knowing he needed to put distance between himself and the prison quickly, Stephen approached a nearby house, concocting a plausible story for the homeowner. Posing as a doctor from the prison who had been involved in a minor accident, he convinced the resident to give him a ride into town. From there, he hailed a taxi and claimed to be a surgeon called urgently to the Texas Medical Center in Houston. The unsuspecting driver raced to the location, believing Stephen's fabricated tale. Upon arrival, Stephen told the driver he needed to retrieve money from his locker inside the hospital. He walked into the building and vanished, leaving the taxi driver waiting in vain. By the time authorities realized he was gone, Stephen was already miles away. Determined to bring Stephen to justice, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice assigned Special Agent Terry Capps to lead the search. Terry, a seasoned leader of the prison's Special Operations Unit, viewed Stephen's repeated escapes as a personal challenge. Forming a specialized task force, Terry began tracking Stephen with relentless determination. The search initially focused on the area surrounding the prison, but Stephen had already fled the state. He traveled to Mississippi, specifically to the city of Biloxi, where he used gambling as a means to generate cash. Investigators pieced together clues from intercepted communications, eventually identifying an individual who had recently interacted with Stephen. This contact led them straight to Biloxi. In an unexpected twist, Stephen's capture came down to sheer luck. While patrolling the streets of Biloxi, the local marshal spotted Stephen and immediately recognized him from the photos circulated by Terry's team. The chance encounter ended Stephen's latest run. He was arrested on the spot and returned to Texas to face the consequences of his actions. Stephen was sent back to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, where authorities took every precaution to prevent another escape. His repeated exploits had cemented his reputation as one of the most resourceful and cunning escape artists in modern history. Though confined once more, Stephen's legacy lived on as a testament to his unmatched ability to outwit the system time and time again. Immediately, Terry contacted the marshal or sheriff of the city and sent them pictures of Stephen. Astonishingly, Stephen's arrest did not take long. The marshal himself stumbled upon him on the street by chance, recognizing him from the photo that Terry sent him. Imagine that, of all the places in the city and all the people he could have encountered, he found himself face to face with the marshal holding his picture. Nonetheless, for the third time, he was apprehended and sent back to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, serving his sentence once again. This time, they added an extra 5 years to his term, making it 45 years in total, with no possibility of parole. The earliest chance he could potentially receive parole would be after a minimum of 11 years. Of course, Stephen knew for sure that it was impossible to settle until he found a new way to escape. This time, the surveillance on him would be intense, making it almost impossible. However, this time, Stephen devised a crazy escape plan in every sense of the word. This plan would not only require trust, but also immense effort. He even came up with this plan after researching the conditions for parole and discovering a potential loophole. He found a special system that granted parole to inmates suffering from chronic and severe illnesses, so he decided to deceive them and make them believe that he was infected with AIDS. Of course, this was an extremely difficult task that would require a lot of effort, unlike anything he had done before. The first step was to starve himself for several months. Then he had to force himself to vomit, feigning numerous symptoms. He also had to falsify medical records. He managed to bribe a staff member to fabricate his records, making it appear that he had AIDS. Now, the symptoms of AIDS were visible to him, and the medical records also indicated that he had the disease. He pretended to be bedridden and ill for 8 months. During this time, none of the prison doctors thought to conduct another examination. They were convinced by the medical records and the initial diagnosis. Stephen's ultimate goal was to convince them that he was on the verge of death, so that they would grant him parole and transfer him to an external care facility. The next step was the most difficult and dangerous in the entire operation. He had to put himself in a coma to convince them that the disease had reached its terminal stage and that he was dying. Stephen collected the sedative medications they had given him for several days. Then he took an overdose of these drugs until he lost consciousness and fell into a coma for 4 days. After all the suffering, prison doctors were convinced that Stephen had only a few weeks left to live. They agreed to his request for parole and sent him to a care center located in the city of Kennedy in the state of Texas. But this time, Stephen decided to make a trick to escape their pursuit forever. He decided to fake his own death. He contacted the prison authorities and also the officials at the care center, pretending to be a doctor named Adam Ruiz. He claimed to specialize in AIDS and said that he had an experimental treatment for the disease. He wanted to know if there were any infected inmates suitable for the treatment experiment. Stephen was the perfect choice for the experiment. With the approval of the prison and the care center, Stephen arranged a plan to deliver himself to the doctor. They believed that someone from his family or relatives would be the one to bring him home after his release from the care center. In a cunning move, Stephen managed to forge his own death certificate, signing it with the name of Dr. Adam Ruiz, the very doctor who had assumed his identity. He sent copies of the forged certificate to the care center, the prison, and the officer responsible for parole release. This way, nobody would go looking for him. Stephen successfully escaped from prison for the 4th time in a way that was both perfect and unprecedented. Finally, he became free, and no one was searching for him. After a few weeks, he regained his vigor and strength, but contrary to expectations, he returned to his old ways of deceit and manipulation. This time, he needed to forge a lawyer's ID card. Unfortunately, he chose to use his exceptional intelligence in the wrong way again. However, he entered a printing shop and asked the owner to create a card resembling those of attorneys. The owner had suspicions but assisted him nonetheless, providing him with the requested card. Stephen took the card and left the printing shop. The owner sensed that something was wrong, so he decided to contact the officer in Houston and inform him of what had happened. He also sent a copy of the card he had made for Stephen to the authorities. When the officer saw the picture, he felt a strong sense of resemblance to the fugitive Stephen. Immediately, he contacted Terry. Terry was taken aback when he heard the news. He had believed that Stephen was still serving his 45-year sentence in prison. He quickly reached out to the prison, which informed him that Stephen had been diagnosed with AIDS a year ago, and that his condition had worsened, leading to his parole release. In the end, Stephen died outside the prison after suffering from the disease. Terry couldn't believe that Stephen had pulled it off again and escaped. Immediately, Terry assembled a new team to track down Stephen and apprehend him. A few weeks after Stephen faked his death, he went to a bank in Dallas, pretending to be a millionaire and attempting to secure a loan of $75,000. However, the bank's vice president grew suspicious of his story and asked him to wait while he went inside to contact the FBI and report him. Sensing trouble, Stephen felt that something was wrong about to happen, so he decided to distract their attention and feigned a stroke, calling for an ambulance and swiftly leaving the premises. However, once the report was made, he was placed under guard in a hospital room until the FBI arrived to investigate his case. But once again, Stephen used his cunning and self-confidence. From his hospital bed, he called the hospital administration, pretending to be an FBI agent, and informed them that he was being released, claiming that the investigation had concluded and that he was no longer under suspicion. After some time, the hospital administration informed the FBI that they had received a call from the FBI instructing them to release Stephen. The FBI agents were surprised, as they had never made such a call. All that remained of Stephen's belongings was his driver's license with his photo on it, confirming that he was in Dallas. Immediately, Terry and his team mobilized in the city and started searching for him in local hotels. They discovered that he had stayed in multiple hotels and that he was constantly moving from one to another. During their investigation, Terry and his team would interrogate various sources until they reached an insurance company. It seemed that Stephen had been in contact with them and intended to deceive them by sending forged documents via fax. This information allowed them to narrow down the search by tracing the fax number, revealing that Stephen was located in a specific area of the city. Terry requested assistance from the local police department in the area to aid in the search and set up an ambush for Stephen. While he used the fax machine, Terry knew that Stephen would likely use it again to send additional documents to the insurance company, intending to deceive them once more. He anticipated that Stephen would use the same fax machine, but the plan took an unexpected turn when two detectives suddenly found Stephen walking in the street right before they could execute the ambush. They swiftly apprehended him, leaving Stephen once again in custody for the fourth time. After the significant embarrassment he had caused the authorities in Texas, they decided to make an example of him and give him harsh sentences. Firstly, he received a sentence of 144 years in prison with no chance of parole. He was then placed in the highest security unit, typically reserved for the most dangerous killers and criminals, despite Stephen's crimes not involving violence. In this unit, prisoners spend 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, with only 1 hour for exercise and personal hygiene, all under strict surveillance. Even to this day, Stephen remains in the same high-security unit, where he has been serving his sentence since 1998. And here we reach the end of our story. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Robber's Mind. Also, click the bell icon to receive notifications for new videos.